Cool. We have a DEXA scan here. So as far as our assessment tools, DEXA scan is going to be the best tool we have. The only problem is it costs like 60 bucks, and it's not. It costs like 60 bucks, and it's not something that you can get every week to compare data, right? And then there's also fluctuations that are associated with DEXA scans even. So it's like, is it even worth it to get it every week or get a membership at a DEXA scan place? There's a great place in Tempe if you guys ever want. I think it's DEXA Fit. I go there all the time. Super awesome guy who owns it. But I would only do these annually, like once or twice a year. I do it at the peak of my mass phase, peak of dieting, and then I compare the data, try to make sure I'm in the same nutritional status, same way you would weigh in, right? And then basically, so that we can get annually. Say if you get a client or yourself, you want to compare, it might be smart to do this at the end of any phase that you're in, and you can compare data across time. Calipers. So calipers, I don't actually recommend these for measuring body fat. I just recommend these for measuring trends in body fat. So someone who's like a professional at measuring caliper data or actually taking the measurements, well, they are going to be the best person to consult for this. You and myself aren't trained in how to use a caliper, so it's likely that we'll get variance in our results and we're not going to be accurate with this. But if we can standardize the best we can get a good idea for which way our skin folds are trending, which way the actual fat tissue is trending, right? So what I recommend here is that you get an auto pressure caliper, basically one that actually, unfortunately they don't have the really good digital ones available. I checked Amazon. But the one where you basically, it's like kind of like a gun, you pull it back and it has a spring action. What will happen is it standardizes the amount of pressure that it puts on each measurement so that you can't clamp down harder and get an inaccurate measurement. Also, you want to take 3 measurements and take the average. I usually just recommend one site. And then these are some of the sites you can measure. So for women, I think it's the quads and calves are the best sites to measure. Men, you can do chest. I'm not sure if this is the iliad. Basically this spot right here, I take my hip bone and my belly button and I cross the two. Basically whatever thing you can do to standardize the measurement is the best way to do it. Like for example, if I was measuring my thigh, I have a birthmark right here. That would be a great way to standardize a measurement, right? And that would be for like measuring tape, right? For women, we want to use quads and hips as they tend to accumulate fat there more. Well, if you're measuring that, maybe you could pull it up to the crease of your pelvic bone and your hip, and you have a birthmark, you can use that as your standardized place of measurement. For men, we would do around the waist for a circumference measurement because men tend to hold body fat in the central area. And we want an auto measurement tape, so one that you actually push and it retracts, as opposed to one that you would cusp yourself. You can also vary the amount of pressure and get inaccurate measurements. And then when you're taking these measurements, you want to actually to standardize them, either blow out all your air and flex your abs if you're taking a stomach measurement, or one that people don't always want to do is take a large inhale and distend your stomach outward. Whatever it is, you want it to be standardized so that we can get accurate data. Yeah, and as I mentioned, hips and thighs for women. Maybe you could actually flex your leg if you're taking a thigh measurement. And then, yeah, the best thing to do is take these things consistently. Visual assessments. I don't know about you guys, but this is how I look at myself in the mirror when I'm checking progress. We want to take photos about every 2 weeks. Even with enhanced bodybuilders, I just really don't see a need to take photos any more than 2 weeks. Like, I don't see results that quickly. For natural athletes, it could be even less frequently, really. But 2 weeks is great, so you don't freak out about individual, like, oh, I think I might have something here, and you're just like zooming in trying to look for stuff. More likely to be able to detect an actual difference if you wait 2 weeks, right? So I used to do that every week with my clients, and I've since backed off. You want to replicate the conditions just as you would with body weight tracking. So you want the same light, you want a light source facing your body, ideally, maybe 6 feet away. You want to do it in the same spot if possible in your house, if you have a spot with good light. Fasted is usually ideal because, again, varying amounts of fluid and food and whatnot. Same time of day and the same camera settings if possible. Usually if you just use your phone, it'll auto do the settings, so you should be fine. And then just look at the areas that tend to accumulate fat. So again, like I mentioned, males tend to accumulate fat here. So you would be looking at these areas. And for women, hips and thighs as well. And check those areas. Or if for example, you have data from previous diets you've done, you can look at where you lost fat first. And then on the reverse, when you're mass gaining, you can see where that fat is coming back on. You can look at those areas and see, oh, is the body fat coming to these areas? And I will mention this later, but if I forget, I just wanted to mention that basically with these assessments, the reason why we do these measurements is basically we compare them to your weight difference and your circumference measurements. And if your circumference measurements are going up really fast along with your weight, we could actually likely back off the surplus a little bit, because we really don't want those measurements, the circumference measurements or the skin folds, to be going up super quick. We want them to not be a large detectable difference, so that we can minimize the amount of fat accumulated. Because these are the sites that we store the most fat on average, what we can do is say, okay, well, if I'm putting on a lot of fat and I'm gaining weight, I can actually potentially reduce the surplus and put on less fat and gain the same amount of muscle. Because usually we actually only need a small surplus to grow muscle. We don't need this large astronomical number, right? So we want to be in this range, and that's how you determine what range is ideal for you, is the range at which you don't put on a ton of fat in the troubled sites and you're still gaining weight. You go on to the next one. All right, activity tracking. So you'll see I'm wearing an Apple Watch. I will say, so cardio is totally fine. I'm not like a hater of cardio on a machine. It's just sometimes a little bit less sustainable for people. You got to drive to the gym, you got to get on a piece of cardio equipment, and it may be harder to standardize. With, like, say, step tracking, you can just look at the amount of steps you did. Say you're at the gym and the Stairmaster isn't available, but that's what you usually use, then you go over to the elliptical for 30 minutes. It's a little bit difficult to extrapolate those. You can use heart rate, again, so it's not like end-all be-all. Best way, so this is, the reason we do this is for, as I mentioned earlier, NEPA. We're accounting for that potential compensation we get of expending more energy. So if we're doing an excess amount of steps and our weight isn't going up, we can tell, hey, I'm moving a lot because I'm in a surplus. So we just keep an eye on that. We try to keep it as standard as we can. Due to metabolic adaptation, we sometimes decrease or increase in energy surplus. And some people actually decrease in energy surplus, which is not a great state, because then you start getting health issues from not moving enough. Best way to track is activity via steps. The calorie estimations, don't worry about them. They're not accurate. There's been some data on many, like, what are they? Fitbit, Apple Watch, Galaxy, all of them are off by hundreds of calories. So don't use the actual calorie data. We're just collecting the actual activity level, the steps. And then when you are in a certain amount, basically higher activity may help with blood sugar regulation, general health. A good number for general health is like 8 to 10,000 steps a day, which I just kind of prescribe across the board, unless there's any other reason. And may help with nutrient partitioning too. I actually know a coach, one of the gentlemen, the gentleman I just interviewed, who has his clients in mass gaining phases do an excess amount of cardio. They might do like 15K steps. It's basically called a high energy flux. Basically, you're taking in a lot of nutrients and also moving a lot. There's very limited data on it. I'd like to see some, but there may be some argument to be said about moving a lot, but also taking in a lot of calories and processing a lot of calories. I wouldn't bet my money on it, though. Just something to keep in mind. And 10K steps, yeah, I mentioned. Good number on average, like an hour and a half of walking. You guys doing okay? Good, good, okay. Sorry, I know I'm talking a lot. Probably the reason for a seminar, but okay, so putting all these measurements together. So DEXA scan, great way to assess where you're at, right? Just a good starting body fat assessment tool. Where are you? What's the rough body fat? What's the rough fat-free mass? What's the rough bone mineral density? All that stuff. Good to have to compare across seasons, so you can see if you've grown muscle. So this would be like something with, like, as you're ending a phase, you're comparing your DEXA from the previous phase, and you're like, oh, maybe I gained 10 pounds of muscle. That's what the DEXA picked up. Otherwise, we're going to use nutrition tracking to standardize our caloric intake and to be able to make adjustments and increase our caloric intake. If we don't know how much we're eating, how do we make adjustments to it? How do we know if we're in a reliable surplus outside of just weight data? Body weight is used to detect if you're in a surplus and what your rate of gain is, which we'll get into later. Caliper sites and measurements will be used to detect the areas you're accumulating fat. Visual assessments will be more subjective, right? You compare those back to your body weight, back to your calipers. Now you have all this data that you can use and say, hey, look, I got my body weight's increasing, my caliper sites and my measurements aren't increasing very frequently, at least at a detectable rate, and I look more muscular in my photos. Perfect, I'm gaining muscle. Or you have, say, your body weight's off and your caliper sites are going up. You know, there's adjustments that you'd make accordingly. Since you have all this data, you're not going off one thing and just saying, oh, my body weight isn't going up, so I'm not growing muscle. Sometimes you could be recomping. You look at your photos, oh, I have more ab definition, I'm more muscular. Maybe it doesn't matter if my weight's going up. There's lots of conditions. There's so much inter-individual variability. So it's always great to collect lots of data. You can go to the next one. Okay, so determining maintenance. A lot of people freak out, like I gotta get the perfect amount of calories to determine maintenance. Well, it doesn't really matter, because what's gonna happen is you're gonna get a calorie amount, and then you're gonna adjust based on what you're gaining and what you're losing, right? There's so many equations out there. I emailed you guys a spreadsheet that I built that does it's the Mueller equation, I believe, which is somewhat accurate, right? It tends to be pretty accurate. The Cunningham is like the most accurate equation to determine your caloric maintenance, which you can just Google. I think the newer one, not the 90s or whatever one is newer, right? There's like 2 dates, whatever the newer one is. That's the most accurate one you can actually get. Doesn't really matter, because you're going to put it into this equation, and there's so much genetic variability, as I mentioned, that one of these things could be off and you're not in an actual calorie, it doesn't actually calculate the calories correctly for you. So it doesn't matter. It's just a starting point. You could literally just use this chart right here and you're fine, right? This chart, this is your weight and your activity level. That's it, okay? And then you just make adjustments, so you're fine. So I don't worry too much about, is this a correct number? I worry about, okay, well, I'm gonna put someone at this level, I'm gonna put myself at this level, and I'm just gonna make adjustments based on what's going on with my weight. That's it. Assess your week-to-week weight changes. I ask for at least 2 weeks to detect if you're in a reliable surplus. You're going from a cutting phase to a massing phase, for example. You could have less stored intramuscular glycogen, less stored carbohydrates in your muscles. You increase your calories, you get a 10-pound weight jump. Oh no, I'm in a huge surplus. Well, no, it was just your actual storage of glycogen in your muscles, not actual reliable measure of fat gain or muscle. And again, great reason to look at photos as well. But I say wait 2 weeks if you make an adjustment. Someone messages me in the middle of the week and they're like, hey, I see my weight isn't moving. I never make an adjustment in the middle of the week. I always wait at least 1 week after I make adjustment, usually 2, to change anything about the program, because it's really hard with all of the variables to detect any difference, and you want to just collect as much data as you can.